The sky was burning the night the Lycan King came to take me. I remember thinking the stars had fallen, that the gods had finally grown tired of us and thrown the heavens down onto Emberhold. But it was not the heavens, it was fire. My father's banners, the red drakes we had flown for 1,000 years, curling to ash along the walls. The bells in the high tower rang and rang until they melted into silence. And through the smoke, climbing the marble stair with his wolves at his back, came him. They called him the Lycan King, Sorin of Nightmore, the wolf who had never lost a war. I had heard of him the way children hear of the dark. A monster to keep you obedient, a shadow at the edge of the map. I never truly believed he would come for us. We were dragons. We did not burn, but we were burning. He climbed the stair with my people's blood on his boots, and he looked at me the way a man looks at something he has already decided to keep, not with hunger, with certainty. Leora of Emberhold, he said. My name in his mouth sounded like a verdict.
The time has come. You will lead them, no matter the cost.
I did not kneel. Even then, with my home dying around me, I did not kneel. So I made him a promise instead. Silent, standing in the ash of everything I had ever loved. I would learn why. I would learn who. And I would make the Lycan King regret the night he decided a dragon was his to take.
They bound me in chains, made for something far stronger than a woman. Silver, cold, humming with old magic, meant to hold monsters. I did not tell them the chains were wasted on me. Whatever fire my ancestors had carried, it had never once answered my call. I was the dragon, heir who could not summon a single spark. The quiet shame of Emberhold. The princess they whispered about behind their hands. If they had known, if he had known, they would not have spent the silver. I watched my city fall from the back of a wolf-drawn wagon. I watched the tower where my mother had died fold in on itself and go dark. I did not weep. Weeping is a language for people who still believe someone is listening. The wagon carried me north for 3 days, deep into the wolflands, and I spent every mile of it turning that promise over like a blade I did not yet know how to hold. Nightmore was everything Emberhold had never been. Where my home had been warm stone and red light, his was the colour of storm and slate, a fortress of black rock crouched against a mountain that never saw the sun. Wolves everywhere, in the halls, in the doorways, in the eyes of servants who would not look at me. They hated me. I could feel it like heat rising off a forge. The dragon, the enemy, the thing their king had dragged home in chains. He did not throw me in a cell. That surprised me. Instead, they gave me rooms high in the keep, a cold and beautiful cage with a door that locked from the outside and a window that looked out over the ruin of everything I had lost. Why? I asked him. That first night, when he came to stand in my doorway as though he had every right to it. Why not simply kill me? You killed everyone else. Something crossed his face then. Only for a breath. If I had not been watching so closely, I would have missed it. I did not give the order to burn your city, he said. You were standing in it. Yes. He did not look away. That was the thing about him I would come to hate. And then worse, to trust. He never looked away. I was. He left, before I could ask what that meant. But he had handed me the first thread, and I have never once in my life been able to leave a thread unpulled. If you have ever lost everything in a single night, you know the silence that comes after. Not peace. the opposite of peace. Stay with me through it, because this is the part where I stopped being the girl they pitied. I did not sleep. I walked the length of my cage until I knew every stone, and when the keep went quiet, I pressed my hand to the door and found what I had hoped for. Old locks, wolf locks, made to hold muscle and claw, not patience. It took me until the hour before dawn, but it opened. The halls of Nightmore breathed around me, all cold air and old smoke. I do not know what I was looking for. A way out, I told myself. But my feet carried me deeper instead, toward a low light and the sound of voices, and I learned the first useful thing I would learn in that place, that the men who burned my home were still arguing about it. The line is not ended. A voice like a blade being drawn. The girl lives. While she breathes, the prophecy breathes with her. She is a hostage. That was Soren. I knew his voice already, low and certain. She is worth more alive. She's worth nothing but ash, the other man again. You were sent to end Emberhold, nephew, not to collect its princess like a trophy. Kill her, or the pack will begin to wonder who truly rules Nightmore, the king or the dragon in his tower. A long silence. I held my breath so hard. My chest ached. Careful, Varek, Soren said at last. You forget which of us wears the crown. Varek. I pressed the name into my memory, like a brand. The uncle. The blade behind the king. The one who had truly given the order while Soren stood in the fire and said nothing. That was the first thread. Here is the second. I turned to slip back to my tower and found I was not alone in the dark. An old woman stood at the mouth of the corridor, wrapped in ash-grey wool, her eyes the milk white of the blind. She should not have been able to see me. She looked directly at me anyway. You carry it still, she whispered. The heart scale, your mother's last gift. My hand went to my throat before I could stop it, to the pendant hidden beneath my collar, the single red scale my mother had pressed into my palm the night she died. Guard it, she had said, with the fire that would not come. Guard it until it wakes. How do you... The flame remembers what the blood forgets, child. The old woman smiled, with no teeth and no warmth. You think you carry no fire. You carry all of it. It only sleeps because it has never had a reason to wake. She leaned close, and her breath smelled of cold cinders. It will have a reason soon, and when it does, the wolf who took you will kneel, or he will burn with the rest. Then she was gone, the way old women in stories are always gone, and I was alone in the corridor with my heart slamming and three things I did not understand. A prophecy that lived because I did, an uncle who wanted me dead, and a scale at my throat that had begun, very faintly, to feel warm. I did not sleep at all after that. In the morning, Soren came for me himself. Not a guard. Him. He found me at the window, watching the pale light crawl over his iron world, and for a moment he simply stood there, as if he did not quite know what to do with a thing he had won and could not use. You left your rooms last night, he said. You left the locks insulting, I answered. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, the memory of where one might go. You heard us. There was no use lying. I heard enough to know your uncle wants me dead, and that you told him no. I have not decided yet whether that makes you my ally, or only a slower kind of enemy. He crossed the room and stopped closer than a careful man would have. Up close, he was all restraint, a storm someone had ordered to stand still. Neither, he said. I made a vow, when I was young and stupid enough to believe vows meant something, that I would never again stand by while the weak were slaughtered for the comfort of the strong. His jaw tightened. I broke it. In your city. I will not break it twice. My people are already dead, I said. Your vow is a little late. I know. And there it was again, that flicker of something that was almost grief, gone before I could use it. Which is why you are going to live, Leora of Emberhold, whether you thank me for it or not. He left me with that, and with a truth I did not want. That the monster I had promised to destroy had spent the night between me and the knife. That the wolf who had burned my home might be the only creature in it who did not want me dead. I told myself it changed nothing. I told myself the scale at my throat was only warm from my own skin. I told myself I would still make him regret me. But that night, when I closed my eyes, I did not see the fire that had taken my city. I saw his. They say you cannot hate a person and study them at the same time. Whoever said that had never been a prisoner. I learned Sauron of Nightmore, the way a blade learns a whetstone. I learned that he woke before his own sentries and walked the walls alone. That he ate little and drank less. That the wolves who feared him would still step in front of him without being asked, and that he noticed every time they did. I learned that he carried the war he had won like a wound he could not stop touching. And I learned that he was watching me learn him. You are counting my guards, he said one evening, without turning from the window where he stood. I am admiring your architecture. You are counting my guards, and you have noticed that the east stair has none after the moon rises. Now he turned. If you run, Leora, Varek will not need an excuse. He will simply have one. Then give me a reason to stay that is not a cage. He was quiet a long moment. Then he did something I did not expect. He held out his hand, not to take, but to offer. Walk with me, he said. I will show you the one part of Nightmore no one has ruined yet. I should not have taken it. I took it. He led me down through the mountain to a place where the black rock opened into a garden that had no business existing in that cold world. A hollow warmed by some deep vein of the earth, green and impossible. Steam curling off dark water. He let go of my hand the moment we were through the door, as though he had been counting the seconds he was allowed to hold it. My mother made this, he said, before Varek taught my father that softness was a thing to be burned out of a sun. He looked at the green with an expression I was beginning to recognize. A man visiting the grave of who he might have been. I have never brought anyone here. Why me? Because you looked at my whole kingdom like it was a prison, he said. And I wanted, just once, for a dragon to see something in it worth not burning. I did not have an answer for that. So I did the coward's thing and changed the subject. Tell me about the prophecy. The one your uncle is so afraid of that he would kill an unarmed woman to end it. Sauron's face closed like a door. It is a story wolves tell to frighten each other. That dragon fire and wolf blood were meant to join. That a dragon queen would rise from the ash of her own house, and the wolf who wronged her would either kneel at her feet or die at them. He shook his head. Varek believes it. Believes that as long as you live, you are the ash the queen rises from. He is not entirely wrong to be afraid. And you? I asked. What do you believe? He looked at me then. Really looked. And the scale at my throat pulsed once, warm as a second heart. I believe, he said slowly, that I have never in my life met anyone who kneels less than you. We did not touch. We stood in his mother's impossible garden with an arm's length of warm air between us, and it was the closest I had come to another living soul since the night my world burned. Stay with her, I told the girl I used to be. Stay one more day. See what he does. The days after the garden were the strangest of my captivity, because they slowly stopped feeling like captivity at all. He began to find me. Not summon, find. On the walls, in the hour before dawn, where I had taken to watching the sun try and fail to climb the mountain, he would stand a careful distance away and say nothing for a long time, and then he would say something true, which is a rarer thing in a king than you would think. My father would have killed you on the stair, he told me one night. Varek wanted me to. I keep asking myself why I didn't. And I still do not have an answer I am willing to say out loud. The wind pulled at him. He did not move closer. He never moved closer. That was the maddening thing. He simply stood in the cold with all that restraint, a fire someone had ordered to hold its shape, and let me feel the pull of it. Once, when I shivered, he unclasped his own cloak and set it around my shoulders without a word, and the backs of his fingers brushed the side of my throat. Just there. Just once. And the scale beneath my collar flared so bright I was certain he must have seen the light of it through the wool. He did not. Or he pretended he did not. I lay awake that night with the warmth of his cloak still on my skin, and understood, with something close to fear, that I no longer wanted to run. That was more dangerous than any chain. What he did next was save my life. It came 3 nights later, in the dark, the way these things always come. I woke to the whisper of a blade and a weight on my chest, and a wolf-shaped shadow with Varek's crest on his collar pressing steel toward my throat. I was fast. I was not fast enough. And then I did not have to be, because Soren was there. I never heard him come. I only heard the assassin stop being a threat. And then it was over, and he was kneeling over me with blood on his hands that was not mine, saying my name in a way that was not a verdict at all. Leora, Leora, look at me. Are you hurt? My hand found his forearm. His control was gone. I could feel it, the tremor under his skin. The wolf so close to the surface that his eyes had gone gold. He had not fractured because he had failed. He had fractured because for one moment he had thought he had. I'm here, I said. I'm here. And that was the moment my fire woke. It did not come as rage. That is what no one had ever understood. What my tutors and my father and even I had gotten wrong for 23 years. It did not come from anger. It came from the unbearable, terrifying thing that happened in my chest when I felt his hand shake because of me. It rose up my spine like a tide of light, and the scale at my throat blazed, and for one impossible heartbeat, the whole room was gold, my hands, my breath, the air between us. And Soren stared at me as if the sun had walked into his fortress and chosen, of all the thrones in all the world, to sit in his. Then it was gone, and I was shaking, and he was holding me, and neither of us said the word we were both thinking. Queen. It's true, I whispered. The prophecy. It's me. I know, he said, and then softer, ruined. I have known since the stair, since you would not kneel in the ruin of your own life. I told myself I took you to keep you from the fire. His forehead dropped to mine. I think I took you because I already knew who you were going to become, and I could not let the world have you before I... He stopped himself, a man who had learned, young, that finishing that sentence got things burned out of you. I should have pulled away. I had promised the ash of my city that I would make this man regret me. Instead, I stayed in the circle of his ruined control, in the fortress of my enemy, with my mother's fire finally awake at my throat, and I understood the cruelest turn of the prophecy. It had never been a curse laid on him. It was a choice laid on me. We did not have long to sit with it, because Varek, it turned out, had not sent one assassin. He had sent one assassin he expected to fail, so that the pack would wake to the sight of their king bloodied, alone, in the dragon's chambers, with a dead wolf on the floor, and a story already waiting to be told. By dawn, all of Nightmore was whispering it, that the Lycan King had gone soft for his prisoner, that the dragon had bewitched him, that the war they had won was being given back, one gentle look at a time, to the last daughter of the house they had been promised was Ash. And standing at the centre of the great hall, when Soren carried me down, because he would not let me walk in wounded and alone, the fool, the brave and reckless fool, was Varek, calm, smiling, a ring of the oldest wolves at his back and the weight of the pack tilting. I could feel it, away from the king who held me, and toward the uncle who had never once looked away from the throne. "Nephew," Varek said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "The pack has questions. About the war prize who walks free. About the vow you broke to bring her home." He spread his hands. "Reasonable, patient, deadly. Prove she is a hostage and not a queen. Give the order you were sent to give." His pale eyes slid to me, and the smile widened. "Or step aside, and let a true wolf give it for you." Soren's arms tightened around me, and I felt the fire, awake now and listening, begin to climb. There is a moment when everything is about to break, where the whole world goes very quiet and very slow. I have lived it twice. Once on a burning stair, when I was only a girl who could not make a spark, and now in the storm-dark heart of Nightmore, in the arms of the man who had burned my home and then bled for me, with an entire pack of wolves waiting to see whether their king would kill me or die trying not to. Soren set me on my feet, gently. He put himself between me and Varek, between me and the whole hall, and I understood that he had already decided, that he was going to refuse, and that refusing was going to cost him everything, and that he was going to do it anyway. So I made my choice first. "He will not give the order," I said. My voice did not shake. I was surprised to find it did not shake. "Because I am not a hostage, and I am not a war prize." I stepped out from behind him, out where every wolf in Nightmore could see me. "I am Leora of Emberhold, last daughter of the dragon line, and I have come to the end of my patience with men who decide what I am." Varek laughed. "The dragon speaks. How?" "You gave the order," I said, and the hall went still. "Not him. You. You burned my city while he stood in it and hated you for it. You sent a boy to do your murder so the blame would land on his crown and not your hands. And now you want his throne, and you think a dead dragon is the price of it. I let them hear all of it. You are right to be afraid of the prophecy, Varek. You just never understood it. It was never about whether the wolf would kneel." "Enough." His voice cracked like a whip. "Kill them both." And the hall came apart. A dozen wolves moved at once, some for me, some for Soren, and I learned in a single heartbeat how fast a thing can go wrong. Soren threw himself toward me, and 3 of Varek's oldest fell on him together, and I saw the flash of silver, real silver, the kind that does not let a wolf heal. They drove him down. They pinned him to the stone. And Varek himself crossed the floor with a long silver blade and laid it against Soren's throat, almost tenderly, the way a man touches a thing he has wanted for a very long time. "Now," he said to me, breathing hard, smiling still. "Burn, little dragon. Show them the monster I promised them, or stand there and watch me open his throat and take the crown clean." I reached for the fire, and there was nothing. Nothing. 23 years of nothing, on the one night it mattered most. The scale at my throat lay cold and dead against my skin, and a horror opened inside me and hollowed me out, because I understood that I had been wrong, that the night of the assassin had been a single spark I could not summon again, and that I was going to stand here, useless, the failed heir I had always been, and watch them kill the one person left in the world who had chosen to put himself between me and the knife. Soren found my eyes over the edge of the blade. He was not afraid. That was the thing that broke me. He looked at me the way he had on the burning stair, steady, certain, unwilling to look away even now, and his mouth moved, and though no sound came, I knew the shape of the word. Live, it said. Don't give them what they want. Live. And that was the door. I had been reaching for rage, and rage is a locked room. But the unbearable thing that happened in my chest when a dying man spent his last breath telling me to save myself instead of him, there was no lock on that. There never had been. They had spent 23 years telling me my fire would come from fury, and they had been wrong every single time, because the key was never anger. It was love. It was grief. It was everything I had lost, and the one impossible thing I had found in the ashes of it. The fire did not warm this time. It ignited. It came up through me, like dawn breaking inside my own body, and I did not fight it. I did not fear it. I let it have me. And the last daughter of Emberhold rose off the floor of that dark hall, wreathed in gold and fire. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the wolves of Nightmore looked up at a dragon and remembered why their grandfathers had learned to be afraid. The silver blade at Soren's throat glowed, then softened, then ran like water and dripped harmlessly to the stone. The wolves holding him let go and scrambled back. And Varric stood alone in a widening circle, because his own pack had felt it too. The way animals always feel it, the instant the thing they feared has been replaced by something they should fear far more. I did not burn them. That is the part Varric never understood. The part that made me a queen and left him only ever a blade. I could have. The fire was mine at last, all of it, and it wanted the whole fortress and everyone in it who had ever called me Ash. But I had watched a city burn. I knew exactly what fire costs and exactly who pays it, and it is never the men who give the orders. So I burned one thing. I burned the throne, his prize, the black stone seat he had murdered a kingdom to sit in. I brought my hand down, and the fire poured out of me, and the throne of Nightmore ran like candle wax and went to nothing. And in the silence after, with the light still glowing gold along my skin, I turned to the man who had ordered my home into ash. You wanted them to see a monster, I said. Look at your pack, Varric. They are not looking at me anymore. He turned, and he understood, too late, what it costs to teach an entire people to kneel only to strength, because they had found something stronger than him, and it was standing in the ruin of his throne, and it had just chosen mercy in front of every wolf he had ever tried to rule. It was the old wolves who took him, the same grey muzzled elders he had gathered at his back to unseat his nephew closed around him instead, and not gently. They had followed him because they believed he was the hardest thing in Nightmore. He had spent his whole life teaching them that the hardest thing always wins. In the end, he was undone by the single rule he had taught them best. Not the flame, I told them, when I saw where their anger was carrying them. I have had my fill of ash. Take him past the far border and leave him there. Let him live the rest of his years as the one thing he feared most, a wolf that no one is afraid of. They dragged him out. He did not run in the end. Men like Varric rarely get to choose the ending they imagined for themselves. And somewhere past the mountains, he is out there still, I am told, nursing a grudge and a prophecy he never learned to read. But that is a colder fire, for a longer night, and a story I have not yet decided whether to tell. And then the hall was quiet, and my fire dimmed, and I stood in the middle of my enemy's fortress, with my mother's gift blazing soft at my throat, and I turned to find Soren back on his feet, watching me. He crossed the hall slowly. The whole pack watched him come, and the Lycan King, who had never lost a war, who had never once in his life looked away, who had burned my home and then bled on the stone to keep a blade off my throat. The Lycan King knelt. He went down on one knee in front of me, in front of all of them, and he bowed his head, and he said, "Then let the story end the way it was always going to end. Not with a dragon in a wolf's cage, with a queen, and a wolf who finally learned the difference between taking and being given. I had promised the ash of my city that I would make this man kneel. I had not known, when I made the promise, that it would feel less like victory and more like coming home. I reached down. I took his face in my hands, hands that, an hour ago, had been made of fire and had chosen, instead, to be gentle. And I did the thing the girl on the burning stair could never have imagined, the thing that no prophecy had commanded, and no king had ordered, and no enemy could ever take from me. I chose him. We rebuilt Emberhold, not the way it was. You cannot unburn a thing, and I have never believed in pretending, but new, red stone, rising beside black dragons and wolves, learning the slow and stubborn work of becoming one people instead of two wounds. It was not easy. The best things rarely are. There are mornings I still wake with the smell of smoke in my memory, and Soren, who knows, does not tell me it is over. He only stays. That is the difference between the man who took me and the man I chose. One wanted to own the fire. The other learned to sit beside it and let it burn free. They call me the Dragon Queen now, the girl who could not make a spark, who rose from the ash of her own house, who burned a throne and spared a kingdom. Children tell the story to frighten each other, the way I was once frightened by his. I hope they get one thing right when they tell it. I hope they remember that the fire never came from hate. It came from the moment I stopped letting the world decide what I was allowed to become. So let me ask you, before I go, because I have wondered it on every one of those smoke-smelling mornings, and I think perhaps you have wondered it too. If you had stood where I stood, with the throne melting and your enemy on his knees, and all that fire in your hands, would you have spared him, or would you have let it burn? Tell me. I truly want to know. And if this story kept you company tonight, if you stayed with Leora through the ash and the fire and the long dark nights of Nightmore, then stay with us a little longer. Subscribe and ring the bell, so the next tale finds you the moment the moon is right. There are more voices in the dark of Moonscar than you know, and every one of them has been waiting for someone, at last, to stay and listen.